Welcome, welcome. It is another great day to be on the 2000 Cubit Rule to have some amazing conversations, and today is going to be no different. So we're excited about that. And it's the beginning of 2026, and a lot of people are getting involved in, picking up the pace on business and work life, all these different things. And so today's subject is going to be really important about how to stay calm and steady in the midst of just a lot of life's challenges. As you know, I was thinking about this earlier. At kind of the end of the year, a lot of times it's busy in one way, but then in the business world, a lot of times people are kind of shutting down what they do and having fun with family and doing all that kind of stuff. And then January hits and it's go time. Like people are ready to get to work. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But we also want to remind people that Sheep Feast is here to help you guys in the business world. We are, as it's, we got this fancy new background this time around. It's a CRM for Christian businesses. And that's really what we're here to help you with. So keep that in mind as you work into 2026. But enough about us. We're going to talk about our guest. And today we have Dan Hayden. He is a former military guy and he's now in the coaching space, especially helping fathers how to be great dads. And so we want to hear about that. And so today we welcome Dan Hayden. How are you doing?
Good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our joy to have you on with us. I'm so glad we were able to connect recently. So I mentioned your military background. So let's
Yep.
just get a little bit of that story, like how you got into that and what led you to where you are now in the coaching space.
Yeah, appreciate that. I participated. I did Army ROTC when I was in college, commissioned as second lieutenant in the Army back in 2000, and the Army took me to an incredible number of incredible places, met a lot of different people all over the world. Deployed to Afghanistan 4 times, deployed to Iraq twice. Met my wife in the Army. I have twin daughters. They were born in Bethesda, Maryland, when we were stationed in Northern Virginia. My next daughter was born in Hawaii at the Big Pink Hospital on the Hill. If you've ever been to the island of Oahu, it's called Tripler. And then our son was born at West Point when I was teaching there. So we're definitely a good Army family. But I worked in the engineer career field. I was not an engineer by degree. I studied political science as an undergrad. And unlike some of the other services, the Army does not require its engineer officers to have engineer degrees because the breadth and depth of the engineer spectrum of operations is so wide and vast, right? They do everything from, manage infrastructure in waterways here in the U.S. to, building infrastructure for military, other armies and military abroad, such as the mission I had when I was in Afghanistan, to, supporting our ground troops, a lot of blowing stuff up and building stuff for them as well. So, yeah, that's how a poli-sci kid became an engineer in the Army's eyes. And back in 2023, we were getting ready to retire here in Southern California. We decided to stay here in Southern California because our daughters were going into seventh grade at the time. Our oldest two were. And if we had moved them, it would have been school number 6 for them. So just kind of imagine that. And so, for the sake of stability, we decided to stay here. And so, I was sort of looking around. I found myself in all of the places that retiring lieutenant colonels are told in transition they should be in, right? All of the networking events and career transition, conferences, things of that nature. And I was all lined up for, pretty good paying gig as an operations management guy, right? And that's, you hear the word operations as a 20 plus year, retiring officer, you think, yep, that's where I got to go. And I was told by the recruiter, hey, your offer's coming next week. And that call never came. It came 3 weeks later, and it was the dreaded, we're going to go with someone else kind of thing. And I was about 10 days out from officially retiring and my full active duty pay turning into a pension, which I can assure you is nothing to sneeze at, and we're very grateful for. But we were looking at a budget deficit, but as we all know, and as He is wont to do, the good Lord continued to provide, and we still don't know how He did or continues to do that for us. Since, like I said, we did retire here in SoCal. So, in any event, that's when I turned to the coaching profession to sort of write the next chapter of my life. I realized through the benefit of coaching, mind you, that I did now have the financial sort of stability and a little bit of flexibility of finance and time to train and educate myself and become educated as a coach and to build out a framework and figure out who I want to serve and all that good stuff. So yeah, that was over 2 years ago, and pretty excited to still be doing this and helping others.
Well, that's amazing. So thank you for your service to our
You're very welcome.
country.
Yeah.
We definitely appreciate that here at Sheep Feast, and of course many other people I'm sure
Yeah.
echo that when they hear about your tenure there with the Army. And so that's
Mhm.
amazing. And yeah, so this journey into and
Mhm.
congratulations as well, getting
Thank you.
into this next chapter of life as you described. And so you said you had this process of figuring out like who you want to serve, and I think that's a the challenge for a lot of business people
Yep.
and pe folks out there, like who is that target audience? Who can I
Mhm.
connect with? And so tell us a little bit about that journey of like honing in on, oh, this is who I'm here to serve.
Yeah, because I don't think my story is going to sound unfamiliar to other coaches out there or other, Christian entrepreneurs, to be honest with you. When I started my coaching journey, I was sort of bound and determined, really felt called to serving young adults, the 20 somethings. I taught at West Point for 3 years. Made really good relationships with the cadets there. A lot of folks I still have good relationships with, that now they're instead of pictures of promotions, they're sending me pictures of, babies, which, is pretty cool to see. And I also ran my last job in the Army. I ran the largest Army ROTC program on the West Coast. And so I had my heart set. I knew I could relate to them, despite, what they would consider my advanced age. But I knew this is who I wanted to serve. Well, after about 15 months, to be honest with you, Mark, I had one paying client and he was paying me pennies on the dollar. We were doing great work, and I'm still in touch with him, 6 months after our sort of contract, our agreement ended, if you will. But again, um, it, something had to give. And so I started working with a sales coach, and I started telling this coach, about my coaching framework and how I like to coach and at the intersection of faith and mental fitness. And mental fitness is defined as our ability to manage our day-to-day stressors and anxieties with a positive mindset rather than a negative mindset. And we can get into all of that later if the conversation leads that way. But I was telling him stories about how this mental fitness program, this framework that I coached through, was so impactful to me as a dad, as a husband, as a human being, to be quite honest with you, and how I just showed up differently with my kids. I showed up differently with my wife, and how I was able to impart a lot of these principles to help my daughters in everything like from softball to academics to just basic relationship stuff. And I was telling him these incredible stories, and the best part is they were all true. Telling him these incredible stories, and he just said, "Dan, I have to interrupt. I really think you ought to be working with Christian men." And he said, "Just put that on your heart. Think about it for a little bit." And so the world just sort of, my mind exploded with ideas of, wait a minute, the reason, there's a couple of reasons I was having trouble gaining traction with young adults. One is, they don't quite understand what coaching is. What they're really looking for is mentorship, and coaching is something completely different than mentoring. Not only that, but they probably don't value what coaching actually is, and even if they did, they probably wouldn't and or couldn't pay for it, right?
Mm.
So that was always a frustration. And so, he sort of urged me, guided me along that path. And, I took a week, 10 days to really just sort of, I met with a couple of, pastors that I know. I met with a couple of dads, and, every one of them said, yes. And what took you so long? Because, and again, if my heart is still for young adults, that's fine, which, it is, because I still love talking to those folks and helping them out. If I want to get to them, I should work through their dads, because that's how I was able to help my daughter with, the anxieties and stress that she felt, in softball, for example. And so my coaching program went from something that was kind of small to something that was really big and ambitious, and I'm super, super excited about where it's going. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to work with young adults, and, sort of the market realities of it all And now I work with men. So like I said, that is probably not going to sound unfamiliar to many of your audience.
Yeah, and it's not unfamiliar for our own journey, right?
Right.
So and I've probably said this 1,000 times in different conversations over the course of our journey is, the scripture that talks about man makes the plans, but God guides our
Yeah.
steps, right? So it's not a bad idea. We talk about the beginning of the year, like what's your goals and plans, like to have those, but we understand too that more than likely those things are not going to play out the way that we thought.
Yeah.
And that's just, because we don't know all the factors, but God does. And so he'll get us on the path as we follow him. And so that's the good news, right, for all of us.
Yeah.
And so for Sheep Feast, like we thought we were going to be serving a particular audience, like when we first started out a while back, and we've been redirected to be more about the business world, which fits who we are. So that's cool.
Yeah.
But there's multiple things that came up while you're talking there as I wanted to kind of dive in. But one of the things you mentioned was like the difference between mentorship and coaching,
Yeah.
because you talked about like really a coach is what helped you redirect, right? That you in your own story, it shows you the value of what you do because someone else was able to help you. Because that whole idea of an outside perspective really brings
Yeah.
a lot of wisdom and that sort of thing. But mentorship, coaching, when we talk about discipling, disciple your business and being a
Hmm.
disciple of Jesus, I think they're all related on some hand. How would you define the difference between someone that's like, hey, I need a mentor versus I need a coach, or I want to be a disciple, or how would you kind of delineate those?
Yeah, in coaching, the coach profession, we assume that our clients, they have all of the expertise, right? It's our job to sort of draw that out of them. And it's not that say, hey, you have all the answers. It's my job to just talk to you until you find those answers within yourself. I mean, there's part of that too, right? But mentorship is more, there's a lot more advice giving, right? There's a lot more hand holding. Hey, and there's a lot more, hey, this is what I have done. This is what I would do. That's mentorship, and that's fine. If during a typical coaching call, someone says, "Hey, what would you do?" I will be very explicit. Let me take my coach hat off for a minute because this is what I'm seeing. If I were mentoring you, this is what I would do. And I would be very explicit about that. So that's right. Coaching is sort of coming alongside someone, right? And just sort of, and mentorship is more along the lines of advice giving. Coaching, really wants to draw out perspectives, right? Especially if a client has, they're having issues with relationships, the way that they're managing themselves, at home or at work, right? It's our job to really sort of allow them to understand the perspectives of sort of key players, if you will, right? And like I said, mentorship. And don't get me wrong, I still mentor folks and I love doing it. I still get calls from captains and majors that used to work for me. They're all now suddenly lieutenant colonels. I still get calls from former cadets who are now captains and majors. And they ask me for advice, and that's fine, right? I still love doing it. But that's really the difference between coaching and mentorship.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for that
Yeah.
insight, Dan. And as you were talking there, and kind of what we set this conversation up around, right, is being
Yep.
calm and steady, and that's kind of one of the key, I think, messages that you bring, right? You're trying to bring some wisdom on how to,
Yeah.
walk through life and not get bent out of shape, if you want to say it that
Yeah.
way. So.
Right. Yeah.
So you mentioned it before about the combination of faith and then just, I guess, mental strength would be one way to say it. How did that come about as, the way that you felt was the right conversation to have with people?
Yeah. A couple of ways I can go with this. Number one, how did that come about? It was through coaching. Back in 2020, I participated in an Army program in which they offered a handful of us coaching. And at the time, I didn't understand what coaching was, but I saw it as another way to develop myself personally. So who wouldn't want to do that? Who wouldn't want to improve themselves in some way? So I gave it a shot. And after my first coaching call, I got off the phone and I looked at my wife and said, that was pretty cool. And during one of the follow-on coaching calls, my coach, I made sort of an offhand statement. right? Sort of a throwaway. And he said, Dan, I know you don't mean it this way, but I'm hearing a lot of saboteur voices coming out in this session. And I thought to myself, what is that? And and he said, this is not for this conversation. This isn't for today. But take a look at the book called Positive Intelligence, and that's this book right here on my shelf. And I read it. I probably read half of it. Let's be honest. I read half of it, didn't implement any of it. And that's a key to the mental fitness program that I coach through, right? You can read all you want and you can listen to lectures and you can go to webinars, and that's probably going to get you 20% to where you want to go through insight, right? It's that 80% of follow through. And so I promise I'm getting to my point. And then I started my coach journey. And I was taking a class through an organization called Coach Approach Ministries, whose mission it is to expand and express the kingdom of God through coaching. And it was all about coaching frameworks. And now, not every coach needs to have a framework. Not every coach needs to coach through a framework. But I knew that I was the type of person that probably needed a framework, probably needed some structure through which to guide my clients. And at the same time, I had a LinkedIn post popped up that this organization, Positive Intelligence, was doing, and they do it periodically, $1,000 grant, for coaches to go through their 6-week mental fitness program. Positive Intelligence, PQ for short. So offhand, we call it the PQ program. That's the framework I used. And I got there through coaching. And now I've been able to facilitate and put people through that program myself, and just have seen, like I said, not only tremendous growth and development myself, but in the men I coach as well. And the one lone young adult that I was able to sign on when I was still working with those folks.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much richness in this idea of, you know, the mental strength, the mental fitness, and it
Hmm.
really goes hand in hand with what the Bible teaches about
Yep.
renewing your mind. And I
Yes.
know that's like the bedrock on which you build
Yep.
things, and it may not always come out for what you do like in the first conversation, right? Because
Yep.
but that's the principle,
Yep.
correct? And Paul's the one that encouraged us to do that. And so, yeah, kind of give us that next step in this conversation about the mental fitness piece, and what does that look like kind of for somebody that's just like, hey, I think that might be something I need to look into.
Yeah. So what positive, and again, this is all backed in neuroscience, cognitive behavioral therapy, and positive psychology and sports psychology. But what all of the research shows from positive intelligence is that we have primarily 10 negative mental thought patterns driven by, they're called saboteurs. We call them the saboteurs because they sabotage our wellness, our relationships, and our performance. Now, our saboteurs, those negative thought patterns have been there the whole time, but for survival's sake, they have built neural pathways, over time. And generally speaking, those are the neural pathways that our brain wants to travel down, because our brains are lazy. They take up 2% of our body, but use 20% of its energy. And so this is not a Robert Frost poem, is one of the things I always say, right? Our brains are lazy. They want to go down the road most traveled. And these saboteurs, they have names that you can probably figure out, right? The stickler and the controller and the avoider and the hyperachiever and the hypervigilant. The judge is the master saboteur. The judge judges you, judges yourself, and it judges others. Or excuse me, judges yourself, judges others, and judges your circumstances. The 9 accomplice saboteurs, we have them in varying degrees of sort of strength and weaknesses. For example, my strongest saboteur is the avoider saboteur, likes to avoid hard conversations. If you wait till the last minute, it will only take a minute, right? You can imagine, right, someone who procrastinates, all of the stress and anxiety they feel in that last minute, right? That is not healthy. That's not a healthy place to be. And in fact, the Bible tells us it's not a healthy place to be, right? We want to live through the fruit of the Spirit. And so on the other side, we have 5 positive mental thought patterns. We call them the sage powers. That's PQ, sort of parlance, if you will. um, empathize, navigate, innovate, explore, and activate. And in this case, five is can be more than 10. But our job, my job as a PQ coach, is to help you identify your saboteur thought patterns, which saboteurs are the strongest, and there's an assessment for it, and I walk you through the assessment results, all that good stuff, and I coach you through it, and how to train your brain to build those neural pathways for those sage powers. Okay. Now, it's a secular program, and that's fine. Yeah, I have I mean, I'm telling you, my wife tells you, you're just a different person. You're a different man. But when I say found, I didn't find it, right? I coach at the intersection of faith and mental fitness. And it's through those things, like you just said, when you talked about Paul, when we talked about Galatians 5:22-23, the fruit of the Spirit. Incidentally, everybody loves to talk about 22 to 23, but not everybody likes to talk about 19 to 21, right? Because those things even mentioned, right? Jealousy and envy, right? Those things, those are your saboteur voices, vice, love, joy, peace, and patience, especially as a parent, right? Gentleness, self-control. Okay. Philippians 4:8. We could go on and on. All of this to say, all of the neuroscience, cognitive behavior therapy, all of the research and all of this stuff is finally catching up to scripture. And that is the intersection at which I coach my men.
That's amazing. It's so important to understand that. Like you said, there's science catching up with the
Yep.
Bible, and I think that's the story across a lot of things, not
Yeah,
just in this particular one, right?
sure.
Because the wisdom of God is eternal, and so he knew what he did when he built us, and so there's this conversation that we're having with mental fitness, and
Yep.
everybody has challenges in one area or another, like you've already laid out.
Yeah.
And while like you said, you primarily help fathers, but um, in some role, we're all in a leadership position, right?
Yeah.
Whether or
Yep.
not we're a father or mother, maybe it's at work, like we're all leading somebody in some way, and so the principles are the same, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So for someone that's in a leadership position, or they're, like maybe they don't think they are, but honestly, they're probably leading something, right? They're going to come up against these challenges mentally, these saboteurs.
Yep.
Um, what would be something that a lot of people initially encounter with this, like how they, the negative thing comes, and
Yep.
then
Yep.
now what? Like they've encountered the problem, and
Yep.
where are you coming in to help them with, like, let's just pick one of them, for instance, and kind of go jump off of that.
Yeah. So number one, you have to name your saboteur. You have to know what it is. You have to know where and when it is most likely to sort of pop up, right? That's not because awareness is the first step of mastery. That's number one. Number two is building self-command, what we call self-command, our ability to, like I said, switch from one neural pathway to the other. And we can do it. It's absolutely possible. And the other three is sort of energizing that sage brain and taking on the sage, what we call the sage perspective. And the sage perspective says all of these things, every circumstance, you can find a gift or an opportunity. However, if you're having a hard time doing so, you have to at least accept your circumstances. Acceptance is much different than resignation, right? Resignation comes from a place of fear and anger and judgment. Acceptance comes from that place of gentleness and faithfulness, right? So let's just take an example, and this was in a recent episode of one of my podcasts, okay? And I also want to be very clear. Bad things are still going to happen, okay? Just because you can suddenly energize your sage brain doesn't mean that bad things don't exist. That doesn't mean that, your water heater is not going to go out, which happened to me a couple of weeks ago. But how are you going to respond? I coach softball, I used to tell my players all the time, you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. But how are you going to respond? So a couple of weeks ago, one of my daughter, I have twin daughters that are freshmen in high school. They're very, very, very good students, but they're very different types of students. They're very different types of people. They're both incredibly, incredibly intelligent. Well, fortunately or unfortunately for them, they're in all of the same honors and AP classes. They're high performers, they're high achievers. They get that from my wife, I can assure you. I'm, sort of legally obligated to say that. But and I I knew that, they were studying for a test, the night before. I was helping one of them study, and so I knew test was coming up and sent him a text message of encouragement. While I knew they were sort of walking from one class to the other, just sort of looked at the bell schedule and said, "Hey, good luck in your test today. Be sure to close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths before you get in that classroom." I wanted them to sort of reset their brains. Whether they did it or not, I don't know. So about an hour later, I got a text message from one of my daughters. "Dad, I got an A!" Exclamation point. Super proud. Congrats, kiddo. That's awesome. All the hard work paying off. That sort of stuff. Very, very proud of her. "How did your sister do?" And I saw the chat bubble come up and I saw the chat bubble disappear and I heard nothing. And I thought, this cannot be good. Now, my wife teaches at that school. And so I just sort of reached out and said, "Hey, any idea how the test went?" And she said, "Not good." And Mark, I'm not going to tell you the grade because it was bad. It was really, really bad. And I felt awful for her, not necessarily with her, right? And I think before I discovered PQ, I just would have launched into a tirade, over text to my daughter saying, things like, "You're not going to get into a good school, with grades like this," that sort of thing, right? But in that moment, I felt that judgment come quick. I identified it. I even said out loud, "That is the judge. He needs to go away." And again, these are thoughts and emotions. They are not who you are, right? So notice I'm not saying I judged or, the judge can't. I said, "That's my judge. It's got to go away." I closed my eyes. We call them PQ reps, mental fitness reps. Very, very easy to do if you know how to do them. In this case, I just did some breathing PQ reps. I just closed my eyes. I felt my feet on the floor. I felt the air coming in and out of my lungs for about 10 seconds. And then I asked the sage question: what does my daughter need from me today? Okay. And the answer came pretty quick: empathy. She needs empathy. And so I went to go pick them up from school. And, look, here's the deal. I've got one daughter who got a great grade. I mean, she crushed it. And I've got another daughter who did not. So that was going to be a tricky needle to thread. So again, I had to energize my sage mind. I had to do some PQ reps, regain that mental fitness because on my way to school, my judge and my controller were starting to pipe in, right? And so I picked him up. My first daughter gets in the car and I said, "Hey, awesome job. Congrats." And she's like, "Yeah, I was, a little nervous, but, it went pretty well." And, they're twins and they're sisters. So they like to rotate, the front seat. And unfortunately for my daughter who had the poor grade, she had the front seat that day. Um, and she got in the car and I just sort of looked at her and I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And she just kind of like looked down and she's like, "I don't know." And I thought, okay, let's just let this simmer. I wasn't going to press her about the test or anything like that. And then about halfway home, I just sort of said, "Hey, what was different on the test than what you prepared for?" Right? I did not ask yes or no questions. Again, she's a teenager. By the time they're teenagers, you need to start coaching them instead of commanding and controlling them as a parent. You need to start walking alongside it. That doesn't mean you don't set boundaries. So I started asking good coaching questions, stuff like that, stuff to, again, allow her to gain a little bit more perspective on her situation. And the conversation went fine. And then I finally said, "Hey, what do you think? How can you prepare better for this next time?" And then she started rattling off all the ways that, she thinks that she can better prepare. You know, but in that same conversation, Mark, I made it very clear to her this grade was not acceptable. It does not meet our expectations, and I knew for a fact it did not meet her expectations for herself either. That is when you are able to approach situations like that in a calm and steady manner, that buys you the sort of emotional equity in order to also speak truth with that grace, right? Because if you speak truth with no grace, again, you're not getting to a good school, with grades like that. That's truth without grace. That's not going to land, right? That's not going to land at work. It's not going to land in the home. And if you speak grace with truth, hey, it's all good. Don't worry about it. You'll get them next time. Yeah, that's now you're enabling those bad grades, right? So being able to use mental fitness in my parenting has, again, in these situations, allowed me to build that emotional equity with her, and allow that trust to really develop and really grow so that I can still speak truth with grace. Hey, look, that was not acceptable, but we're going to do everything we can to help you move forward. And spoiler alert, she had a final 10 days later and she absolutely crushed it. I had two girls in my car that afternoon who got A's on their final. So it worked, bottom line. But again, step one, you have to understand where your saboteurs are working. You have to call them out. And then you have to train your brain. And again, that's what I coach men to do on how to rewire their brain so that they can shift from negative to positive. Because again, our brains have functions that respond in the negative, right? Our sympathetic nervous system sees a threat. It could be real, could not, doesn't matter. Our brain perceived a threat and it's going to start doing things like, your chest is going to tighten up, your mouth is going to dry, right? All of those things. You can't do any of that. You can't stop any of that from happening, but you can stop it, in its tracks and shifts, right? Again, bad things are going to happen. How do you want to respond? How are you going to respond? Right. So I hope that answers your question. There's a long answer, but yeah.
No, that's wonderful to get that example and perspective of how, you can walk through,
Yeah.
difficult situations with wisdom. And some of the things you talk about, someone could be seeing this for the first time and they're not familiar with the PQ
Yeah.
realities, but you can really see the, you know, how what God's doing is
Yep.
integrated in that, even if
Yeah.
the original people that made it maybe weren't thinking fully that way, but like the
Sure.
sage questions, that's really
Yeah.
Holy Spirit, if you think about it
Yes.
that way. That's his, wisdom coming
100%.
through when you're asking those questions. And you said, immediately empathy came up. So that's because you're posing a
Yes.
question and engaging, and especially as a believer, right? We have the
Yep.
ability to engage Holy Spirit in that way. And he's the original sage, right? And there's other things, right? The saboteurs, you think about the scripture that the heart is um, deceptively wicked above all
Yeah.
things, right? And that's where a lot of that comes out of, right? It's our
Sure.
natural fallen nature where we're gonna,
Yep.
the road's already been run over so many times, right? And so, like you said, the introduction into the Holy Spirit or the sage wisdom that you
Yeah.
you guys are doing really helps not only just counterbalance it, but overtake it and bring about the fruit.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's that shift from like I said, negative to positive, right? Because here's the good news. God has given us the authority to command our thoughts and emotions, right? And it's all right there. Another great, coaching question in this regard is, where did you see God today? That's a great conversation starter at a dinner table, because we also have a function in our brain called the reticular activating system that is our brain's filter. Like I said, our brains are lazy. If you're getting ready to go buy a yellow car or you bought a yellow car, suddenly the road is filled with yellow cars because our brain is no longer filtering out yellow cars. If you walk through the day and at the end of the day, you ask yourself, where did I see God in today? You are going to start seeing God in more and more places and in more and more people because you have now trained your brain to no longer filter those things out, right? So that, again, that's another great coaching question. And I even asked my daughter, "Hey, what is the opportunity that you have found in all of this?" Right? And then I asked her sort of after the finals and after she had found success, right? She's like, I realized I needed to study differently and I needed to have the confidence to ask for help. Um, Amen. Absolutely, right? So no, you're right on. You're on track with all of that. You're spot on.
Yeah, the reticular activating system is familiar to me from training that I did in dream interpretation, interestingly
Okay.
enough, years ago. And, of course, in the Bible is full of dreams, and
Right.
there's, people having dreams and dreams being interpreted. And it's that same thing once you start activating, like, because a lot of people would say, I don't have dreams, and which is not true. It's like if you don't have dreams, it means you're dead. It's just that you don't remember them or your
Sure.
brain's not noticing them. And so it's the same exact, um, you know, idea behind all of that as well.
Yeah.
As far as we're talking about being calm and steady
Yep.
in life and in our business world as well. And so, is there other things that as you've begin to coach people and walk them through life, have you seen some things like for business men and as they've come apart or come, well, that might be coming apart, but as they're coming across the things in their daily life that are common issues that you're finding that you're able to help them with?
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, it's all about on how you start your day and how you sort of build these patterns of mental fitness exercises into your day-to-day rhythms and routines. Because if you try to replace a habit with a new habit, it's probably not going to work out very well. But anyway, um, you know, look, traffic's a thing in Southern California. People get real angry when someone cuts them off in traffic, okay? Some people will hang on to that anger through their day and maybe not release it until after lunch, right? Well, what PQ presupposes is, that anger is good for one split second and then you need to shift, okay? And now you're better prepared to walk into the office for whatever meeting, whatever presentation, whatever client call you have that day, okay? So, and that was a problem I used to have. I used to hold on to anger for far too long. And then I saw it in my own kids. And then, through a lot of, again, mental fitness work. And depending on the ages of your kids, sometimes, they're not gonna want to do these, and it won't work, the mental fitness reps. But how you show up and how you model it certainly does. Um, you know, you flub on a big presentation or, you lose a client. It's okay. What is the gift or the opportunity that you can find from that? And especially as a dad, as a working dad, I'm now a stay-at-home dad slash coach. And, I love being in the position that I'm in. But when I did have a full-time job, look, being in the Army isn't, it's pretty stressful. And, I would bring that stress home with me quite often. Even when I wasn't in, and I loved every job I ever had in the Army, don't get me wrong, but a lot of stress and anxiety comes with it, a lot of late night phone calls, that sort of thing. Well, if you're bringing stress home to your family, is that really how you want to show up? Now, understand, I get it. You have this need to be the provider for your family, and that's fine. Kudos to you. But when you're coming home from a stressful day, do you really want to hang on to all of that work stress, or do you want to be present with your family? And so, one of the guys I'm working with, is doing just that, right? And he is using the PQ techniques that I coached him throughout the day. Look, your judge, especially, when you're in meetings that you don't want to be in, or you think, hey, this probably could have been an email. That is your judge saying that, judging your circumstances, okay? And it's judging others, certainly. So in that moment, identify the judge, do some PQ reps, right? It's not just breathing, right? There are tactile PQ reps and audio PQ reps and visual PQ reps. And you can do these things and people don't even know that you're doing them, right? But you're moving your brain, you're rewiring your brain, and you're moving to a calmer, steadier neural pathway with which to act, right? So, you can do that throughout the day when people start to frustrate you, or again, these meetings going a little longer. And that way you're not holding on to all of that angst, and you're coming home and you're showing up and you're being present for your wife and your kids, right? You have the time and the patience, and again, to be there and to give them the attention and so that they can be seen, when it counts.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned anger, and I'm sure that's one of the primary things that you help people with.
Sure.
Interestingly, I had a conversation this week with someone that brought that up, and they had been not with a coach, but in a sense, maybe a coach, but a psychologist that talked about
Yeah.
anger. And it's like anger is just not anger by itself. He was saying the psychologist was telling them that it's a multifaceted thing. You're not just
Sure.
angry for anger's sake. There's like maybe
Right.
there's sadness or all
Yeah.
these other triggers that we had that term that a lot of people use nowadays. Growing
Sure.
up, no one talked about triggers, but now everyone knows what a trigger is. uh, but yeah, so there are all these other facets that can bring someone to a point of anger. And is that part of like your process too? It's like, what are you actually dealing with versus like this surface level? That's the final straw that made you angry.
Yeah, and again, it really all goes back to the saboteur framework because all of the root cause is coming from one of these 10 saboteurs, right?
Mm.
But you can also, especially as a parent, you can also ask those good coaching questions and try to identify, why is my kid, frustrated right now? Is there an unmet need? Is there a fear that needs to be addressed? What might that fear be? And the question is not what are you afraid of, right? It's just sort of talking them through. Or maybe there's a value. I mean, how many times have we heard this? It's not fair, right? Well, that they value equity, right? Especially, when they're counting Christmas gifts under the tree. But so there's always, you're right, there's always something underneath it. And it's our ability, not only as coaches, but as parents to, again, not judge and not live from a place of controlling or pleasing. I mean, how many of us overspend for our kids and then regret it a month later when those credit cards come due, right? That's our pleaser saboteur. That is us. I've actually said to my kids, don't put me in a position to say no. I'm sorry. That is my pleaser saboteur talking. So yeah, there's always a root cause behind stuff like anger, and judgment and jealousy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this, like we said before, we're at the beginning of 2026 and
Yeah.
kind of wanted to get your thoughts on like where do you see this year going and just kind of as you building your coaching business and just kind of your thoughts on what people can look forward to maybe through not only through your coaching business, maybe you have some cool things coming up, but just kind of some general thoughts about what people can hope for and believe God for this year.
Yeah, that's a great question. And where's my notebook? I think it's downstairs. It doesn't matter. Um, my pastor said something the other day, probably about 3 weeks ago during one of his messages. You know, when bad things happen, tragedy strikes, whatever the case may be, and someone comes to him and says, "How can God allow this to happen?" Or, and his typical response, right? His go-to response is, he doesn't know, but he knows that God has his hand in everything and he reigns supreme over everything. So bring that to mind when bad things do happen. Okay. Because that's important to remember. And he also, I think it was the same day he was preaching, he was preaching through the Gospel of Mark. He very rarely preaches specifically through one particular book of the Bible. I've been going to this church for almost 5 years, and this is the first time he's done it. But again, new Christian, what's this Christian stuff all about? Here, go read Mark, right? Because it's pretty good baseline. Anyway, and he put all the disciples into a boat, and the sea started raging, and they were heading north, to go sort of proselytize to the Gentiles, right? Sort of stranger in a strange land, and the weather is just, I mean, these guys are freaking out. And what is Christ doing? He's sleeping, right? And and we all know, how the story goes. They wake up, they doubt him, teacher, I mean, do you want us to die? Right. I mean, that's not exact words, but you get that was the intent. And he basically, calms the storm, and they're just like, what just happened? Right. And the point of all of this is, and specifically, as we look forward to 2026, is don't forget the same Christ that can calm the storm is the same Christ that will, on occasion, lead you into the storm as well.
Mm.
Okay. And remember, bad things are going to happen, but God is in all of it and he reigns supreme over all of it. So that's that. I guess that's how I didn't answer that question. And that's
Yeah.
how I look forward to 2026.
Yeah, that's a great thought to keep in the front of our minds as we move forward because just like you say, being calm and steady, that's
Yeah.
literally what Jesus did
Right.
in that moment. And of course, he's our example of the perfection of what you're coaching, right?
Right.
He's at one with the Father and his body, his mind, his spirit is all, pointed in the right direction. And so you're to me as I'm listening to you, you're bringing all these elements and bringing it into harmony, right?
Yeah.
there's the spiritual aspect of it. There's our body, like you're literally talking about, breathe in, keep your feet on the, there's simple things that you're
Yeah.
helping people like touch ground, literally. And then that engages our soul, our heart,
Yeah.
as well, and all these things. So it's a great thing that you're doing there, obviously, to help fathers and leaders become better men with their families and elsewhere in life. So this has been a great conversation, Dan. I want people to find you online. Where should they go to get more of Dan?
It really depends on what medium they want, Mark. I've got a podcast. It's called the Positive Legacy Podcast for Christian Fathers. It's on all the platforms, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all of them, right? Um, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. If they just search my name, trust me, I'm gonna come up. And I know for a fact because I was at softball tryouts the other day, and one of my daughter's friends was mentioning to my daughter, "Hey, that's your dad, right? Yeah. How do you know? Oh, remember that day we looked him up online? My dad and my daughter's like, yeah, Dad, don't forget you're on the internet. I'm like, okay, that's fine. My website is www.findyourazimuthcoaching.com. You can put it in the show notes. Azimuth
Yeah.
is a really just a military technical term for direction. I just got a little too cute when I was, coming out of retirement, but it's a good conversation starter. And so that's my website. Got a podcast, Positive Legacy Podcast for Christian Fathers. I'm on all the socials, and yeah, I mean it's pretty the easiest way.
Yeah, amazing. Azimuth has to do with orienteering, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Man, I remembered something from
There you
back in the
go.
day. So yeah, no, that definitely is. It's kind of like the sheep feast conversation. A lot of people hear
Sure.
sheep fest, like actually it's feast, and then we get to talk about John 21:17 and
Yeah. Yeah.
feed the sheep and all that. So very cool. Well, I want to give you the final word here, Dan. What's something that you'd like to leave with the folks today as we wrap our time up?
Yeah, just continue to live with grace, grace with others, and grace for your kids and grace for your families. And again, bad things are going to happen, right? Life is not all rainbows and butterflies. I mean, it's 70 degrees and sunny where I am right now, but that's okay. But how are you going to respond? How would you want to respond? Would you rather respond through things like fear, anger, and judgment, or through the fruit of the Spirit? So I'll just leave you with that with a good open-ended coaching question for you.
There you go. Thanks so much, Dan, for sharing what you're doing with Find Your Azimuth and all the other great things that you got going on with your podcast. Be sure to check those out, folks, especially if you're a dad. You hear a lot about daddy issues. Dan's a guy that can help navigate those. And so check him out. And for everybody that's watching, we will catch you guys next time on the 2000 Cubit Rule. Blessings.